Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be doing the Eclectic Reader tag. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and today I thought I would bring you another tag video. This one's the Eclectic Reader book tag. I was tagged by Berna's Bookish Adventures, which is a great channel that I suggest you check out. I will link Berna's video in the description down below, along with the video of the original of this tag, which was by Cozy Reader Kelly. So please do go and check those out if you would like to. And it's quite a short tag, there's only 5 prompts, but for the 5th prompt I have got to recommend quite a few books, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, let's dive straight into question number 1. Where do you get your book recommendations? Well, it's a complicated question because since I've been on BookTube, I have been for pretty much the whole time on a book buying ban. The only exception to that was when I did get a few books for my birthday. So I haven't been buying any books, but I have still been amassing recommendations in case I want to use the recommendations by getting audiobooks, or in case I find those books in the library, or eventually when I get off a book ban I intend to buy some of them. Before that, when I was amassing the over 200 books that I have, I got most of my recommendations from my mum. We share similar reading taste, I would say, in that we both read quite eclectically, but I think my mum probably reads an even wider range of genres than I do, and certainly reads a lot more sort of straightforward fiction, but she has given me a great deal of very good recommendations over the years. I've also had recommendations from friends before, but now I would say that the majority of the recommendations I'm getting are from watching booktubers and from Bookstagram. Question 2 is, how do you decide what to read next? Well, since being on BookTube and Bookstagram, I've been doing TBRs, but I have always been doing like quite large TBRs, so I've had a lot of choice in them, and that has helped me to pick what to read next because I've pretty much rigidly stuck to the TBRs so far. This month I did go off the rails a little bit and got some books out of the library to do with Shakestember, and I have read some of those, but interestingly I've actually gone back to my TBR. Before I used to make TBRs, I think it was just a case of going and picking whatever I fancied off the shelf. I have found with some of the TBRs that I'm thinking about which book I'll read next while I'm reading a book, and that then when I've got to the end of the book I go to the TBR and pick something else instead, so you never can tell. I mainly just pick a book based on what I feel like reading. Question 3 is, how have your reading tastes changed over time? And I can pinpoint a time when my taste definitely changed. Hello Harry. Hi Harry. If you're new to my channel, this is Harry, my cat. He does like to make appearances and seems to think he's in charge of the channel, to be honest. So are you going to sit with us today and talk about our reading tastes? Yeah? Good boy. So how have your reading tastes changed over time? So when I was first reading adult fiction in my late teens and early 20s, especially when I was first at university, I used to mainly read contemporary. In fact, I would say I was reading entirely sort of contemporary books, mostly ones with romance in. What changed was that at the end of my 3rd year of university, when we'd finished with our assignments and exams, there was a little bit of time when I'd finished exams and my then boyfriend, who is now my husband, was still working on something, but I finally had time to read for pleasure again, and it was then that we discovered a bookstall in the student union, which had actually always been there, but probably hadn't had time to look at it before. On that bookstall was first few of the Rebus series by Ian Rankin, and I decided to take a chance on buying the book Noughts and Crosses, and we bought it. I read it first because my husband was still doing his exams, and then he read it afterwards, and we were just absolutely hooked. Went straight back to the bookstall to buy the next few, and I never looked back really. I've been into crime fiction ever since. I spent quite a few years trying to find any crime series that were as good as Rebus and would live up to that, but I'm not sure that I've ever really done that. Not books that are the same type of sort of detective police procedural crime fiction. I don't think I've found anything else to beat it, really. I then went on to read lots of American crime authors like Karin Slaughter and Tessa Ritson. Then found Agatha Christie and classic crime and never looked back, really. So that's been the main big shift in my reading tastes. I would still say that I read fairly widely, and lately my taste has started to shift again a little bit. I talked in my classics tag video about how I got off to a bad start with reading classics and how I now feel ready to read more classics. So I think this year and last year, both with and without BookTube, I've been really encouraged to try some more classics, and I would say that I'm definitely really into reading classics at the moment, but I do like to break up reading classics with some crime and thrillers and things like that. A bit of horror, a bit of sort of, I suppose, sci-fi and fantasy. In terms of fantasy, I don't really read high fantasy. I mainly enjoy sort of YA fantasy and fantasy that involves dystopia. Yeah, let's go on to question 4, which is what genres and subgenres do you never or usually never read? I'd like to say that there are no books that I would ever say never to, but I read less of sort of literary fiction than I think I could do, although it is a genre that I would not mind trying more of. The main genre or subgenre that I usually never read is the genre I used to only read, which is contemporary. So I don't really read contemporary, and especially not contemporary romance. It's just not really a genre that I particularly enjoy anymore. But if I do get a recommendation of it, I will give it a try. I do try most things. Hence, I am an eclectic reader. Right, question 5, prompt number 5, is what are 5 specific subgenres you enjoy? Include a recommendation or 2 for each one. I've got a few. I found it quite tricky to decide which subgenres I was going to pick, but I have already mentioned all of them, I think. So I've picked 2 types of dystopian fiction and 2 types of crime fiction. The first one is crime, detective and police procedural crime. So I thought I would recommend the book that I've just mentioned, which changed my taste, which is Noughts and Crosses by Ian Rankin. I'm recommending this particular one because it's the first book in Ian Rankin's Inspector Rebus series, and I really loved this one, and it really got me into reading crime. Just to set the scene, the first line of this book, and one of my favourite first lines that have stuck with me, is "The girl screamed once, only the once." Even that, however, was a minor slip on his part. That might have been the end of everything, almost before it had begun. I just absolutely loved that first line, "The girl screamed once, only the once." If you're a fan of crime and police procedural, I would highly recommend the Rebus series in general. I've read it in order, and I continue to read it in order. I have still got about 3 or 4 of these left, because Rebus does age over time and new characters come in over time. So starting at this one is a good idea. My other recommendation would be Tessa Ritson and her Rizzoli and Isles series, which I haven't mentioned for a while. In my opinion, the Rizzoli and Isles books are far better than the series, and it is Detective Rizzoli that I enjoyed following rather than the medical examiner Maura Isles, who actually doesn't come into it until around about book 3 or 4. So yeah, so if you've enjoyed the Rizzoli and Isles TV series, which is a bit more light-hearted than the books, I would recommend trying the books if you do like sort of police procedural crime fiction. These ones are quite gory though, and yeah, Tessa Ritson doesn't really hold back. So the second subgenre of crime that I want to mention is classic crime and mystery. And of course, it wouldn't be a video without me recommending Agatha Christie. So the book I have picked for classic crime and mystery is Lord Edgware Dies. And I've picked Lord Edgware Dies because I was looking for a book with my favourite sort of setting, and that is a country house or a locked room mystery. I really like Lord Edgware Dies because there's a very small pool of suspects. Suspicion immediately falls on Lady Edgware for murdering her husband. This is a Poirot mystery and I highly recommend it. As you all know from my other videos, there are many other Agatha Christie's you could choose. If you are looking to check out a different author within the classic crime, I would recommend Dorothy L. Sayers. Her series of Lord Peter Wimsey books starts with Whose Body? I haven't read that many of this series yet, but I would like to read more. The third subgenre that I want to recommend is thrillers. Again, I'll mention an author that I've mentioned before, and I do have a video solely on this series of books if you would like to check that out as well. And I'm going to recommend Tripwire by Lee Child. This is a Jack Reacher thriller and is one of the best ones. Jack Reacher is trying to solve a bit of a crime in this one, so I guess it's kind of joins into crime as well. But yeah, any book in the Jack Reacher series is an excellent thriller. I do highly recommend them. I also in the past have really enjoyed Dan Brown's thrillers, Harlan Coben's thrillers. They're both great authors that write very twisty and fast-paced thrillers. The next genre I'm going to recommend is post-apocalyptic dystopian fiction. Favourite two books from this genre at the moment are The End of the World Running Club, which is a great story about a character called Ed who survives an apocalyptic event but ends up separated from his family and has to try and run the length of the country in order to reunite with them. Ed is a very dislikable narrator, but you do end up pulling for him, and it's a really, really good read. I've recommended this to anyone who will listen, and I've yet to have any complaints about anyone being disappointed. It's a really roller coaster ride of a book, and I highly recommend this as a post-apocalyptic thriller. Secondly, in this category, I would recommend Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Again, the apocalyptic event happens during the book, and this one is more of a deadly virus type one. So I did read this pre-pandemic, so maybe post-pandemic it would be a bit too close to home. But yeah, this one involves a deadly virus and it follows some of the survivors years later and some of the survivors in the immediate wake of the virus. It says on the front here, disturbing, inventive and exciting, and it's certainly all of those things, so I would highly recommend trying Station 11 if you haven't already and you enjoy post-apocalyptic fiction. So the final subgenre that I was wanting to recommend some books from is the dystopian YA fantasy type subgenre. And I've really enjoyed a lot of YA books over the years, but particularly ones involving dystopia and involving fantasy. The most recent ones I've found that I've really enjoyed have been the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which I really enjoyed as audiobooks in the last few months. I would definitely recommend them if you haven't tried them. And I also really enjoyed the Fifth Wave series by Rick Yancey. Those were a little bit more maybe sci-fi than fantasy, but they were definitely YA and they were definitely dystopian, or certainly post-apocalyptic. So I would recommend that series if you haven't tried those. They're definitely much better than the film that came out of the same name. But my absolute top recommendation in the YA fantasy dystopian genre would be the Hunger Games series. I have yet to find another YA fantasy that I've loved more than I love these. People have definitely said to me sometimes, this is even better than the Hunger Games, but I've always found that they were lying. I just absolutely loved this series. It's so much better than the films, and I love Katniss as the main character, Katniss Everdeen, and all the characters in this I really enjoy. The only book I haven't yet read is the new prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I'm not really sure whether I want to read that because I have a bit mixed feelings about it, and it won't be about Katniss, so I'm not really sure what's the point. Absolutely loved this first Hunger Games book. I loved the sequel, Catching Fire, and I really loved the final book in the trilogy, Mockingjay, although it was very sad. So highly recommend this trilogy if you're wanting to get into YA fantasy, or even if you are in a bit of a reading slump. I think this would be a great book to pull you out of the reading slump. But having said that, I think everyone I'm recommending this to will probably have already at least tried The Hunger Games. But I do love this series. I have a very soft spot for YA fantasy because of this series. So that's my last recommendation for this eclectic reader tag. I hope you've enjoyed it and enjoyed learning about how eclectic my reading tastes really are, which is very. I'm going to tag a couple of people in this. I'm going to tag Jennifer Loves Books, which is a channel I've recently found and really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to doing Jennifer's tag as well, which will be a video that will be out soon. If you haven't done this tag before and you would like to, please do consider yourself tagged. Please do comment down below if you have any opinions on the books that I've mentioned, or if you would like any more recommendations in any of the categories that I've talked about. Please do give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I talk about books on a very regular basis on my channel, and I'd love to have you here to talk about reading some more. I hope to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice in the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.